All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome to my channel. I do educational videos on so many different topics, but we're locked in right now on working on the reciprocal system of theory. This is a theory derived by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century. He died back in 1990. And shortly after that, his final book was published called Beyond Space and Time. It's a book that we're going over right now. We're in chapter 20 called Moral Values. And the basic idea behind Larson's system of theory, it's a theory of everything, a system of theory, meaning that if you get the theory, it's a system. You can apply it to anything. You can apply it to any subject. And but you have to kind of understand the basic way it works. And to start with that basic understanding, you just in Larson's system, the universe is not made out of matter. It's not made out of energy, but it is made out of motion. In particular, most basically, it's a kind of motion that he calls scalar motion. Scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no direction, no specific direction. You can think of a scalar motion as taking a balloon, putting a bunch of dots on the balloon, and blowing up the balloon. All of the dots are moving away from each other. If you suck in the balloon, all of the dots are moving toward each other. That's a scalar motion. There's no particular direction, but there is a magnitude away or toward. And that scalar motion, even though it takes 3 dimensions of space to represent that motion, that's a one-dimensional scalar motion. And there are 3 dimensions, 3 scalar dimensions. But really, mainly, we're dealing with just one dimension of the scalar motion. And that is, okay, so the motion, universe is made out of motion. Motion is the relationship between space and time. That basically means a fraction or a ratio, and it basically means that the space and time are reciprocals of each other, just in the same way that 2/3, the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. One is on the top and one is on the bottom. And then if you invert it, then the other one is on the top and the other one is on the bottom. But they still have the same basic qualities of 2 and 3. And so too with time and space. The thing we know about space is that it's 3-dimensional. Now those are really vectorial dimensions, dimensions with a direction, x, y, z coordinates. It takes 3 of those dimensions just to make up one scalar dimension. But x, y, z coordinates, and you could also think of it in terms of 4 dimensions, but we'll get into that later. And so time also has 3 dimensions by the same logic of the reciprocal. The same qualities adhere to both. At time, what we know about time is that time is progressing. It's always getting later and later and later. In the same way, space is progressing. The flow of space, it's always getting further and further apart. And we have perceived that through the Hubble telescope way back in the 1920s even. All of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. No particular direction, but just like the balloon example, or perhaps you could use a more, not just a surface example, but a true 3-dimensional example would be something like raisin bread. All the as you cook the bread and it rises, all of the raisins are moving away from each other. The other thing about space and time is that they are in discrete units. Okay, there's a quantized. There, there's a minimum unit of time and a minimum unit of space, and you can't get below that. 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light. The speed of light is not the fastest speed in the universe, as Einstein contends, but as Larson contends, the speed of light is the midpoint or the null point of the universe, the neutral point. Half of the universe is actually moving faster than the speed of light. Larson calls this the cosmic sector, or sector 2. Half the universe is moving slower than the speed of light. That's the part that we're used to, and that is called the material universe, or sector 1. Sector 1 builds up by aggregation up to its most complex level, which is DNA. At that point, DNA becomes eligible to be mated up with a cosmic unit from sector 2. And when that happens, the cosmic unit controls the sector 1 unit, and the total sum of them is the life unit. The life unit is a combination of a sector 1 and sector 2 unit or element. And then this life unit also develops up until its most complex form, which Larson says is the intelligent human being. At that point, the intelligent human being is eligible to be controlled overall by a sector 3 entity. Now, sector 3 is the area that is outside of space and time, independent of space and time, beyond space and time, or the metaphysical. Other people might call it God, or the gods, or the spirit world, or the religious, or what have you. Larson calls it sector 3. Sector 3, whereas sector 2 is guided by evolution, by survival, sector 3 is guided by I guess you would say spiritual evolution, or by ethical behavior. So that is really what this whole book is about phenomena from sector 3, from this metaphysical. That's why it's called Beyond Space and Time. It looks into the metaphysical. Now, the metaphysical can communicate with the human being, with the intelligent human being under the control of sector 3, through various things such as intuition, ESP, religious revelation, scientific insight. And those messages that we receive from sector 3 are all correct. Our ability to translate those messages varies depending on our level of preparedness. So any mistakes that we make coming from sector 3 is because of our limitations, not because those messages are not correct. And so now he's in the middle of chapter 20 talking about moral values. And the last part that he was just saying here, are finding that such information, the information, about the ethical code, can be obtained by direct communication from sector 3 through the process we call by various names such as intuition, revelation, or insight, now clears the way for a systematic approach to this problem analogous to the procedures of science. So he's really attempting to kind of turn religion into a science. And that's been done before. You've probably seen, you may have seen some of my videos on the tree of life. The tree of life is also, I would say, an attempt to turn religion into a science where you are, you have a kind of a hierarchy of spiritual values. It's a map of our spiritual evolution, for lack of a better word, our spiritual development. And so let's let Larson take over from here. The traditional moral value systems were derived from religious sources, and in view of the revelatory nature of the original religious doctrines, the basic elements of these systems, applying as they do to relatively simple ethical issues, should be for the most part authentic. Okay, so when we get these intuitions on simple matters, we are able to translate them correctly for the most part. Over the years, however, the items derived from the original revelations have been subject to numerous extensions and modifications, and the authentic moral principles have been buried in a mass of ritualistic and secular additions. A growing recognition of the absurdity of much of the present content of religion-based moral codes has weakened confidence in their validity, and this, together with the general decline of religious influence, is now responsible for the value crisis in modern society, the term that is now commonly applied to the lack of any generally accepted system of moral values crisis. Now that we have identified the source of the code and the means whereby information concerning its content is transmitted to the human race, and have outlined the methods by which the validity of that information can be tested, the obstacles that have hitherto stood in the way of arriving at definite conclusions on moral issues have been eliminated. We are now in a position not merely to construct a code, but to ascertain the provisions of the code, the rules of Sector 3. Like the analogous task of developing the details of the physical universe from theoretical premises, just like he did in the reciprocal system when he was dealing with physical things like science, like chemistry and physics and astronomy. Now he's plugging this into the metaphysical. The task of developing the moral code in full detail is a colossal undertaking, and it will not be complete for a long time, if ever. But it should be possible within a reasonable time to produce a body of ethical knowledge comparable to the existing state of knowledge in the physical world, physical field. This will accomplish all that is currently expected of a system of ethics. To demonstrate this point, let us check the general characteristics of the Sector 3 code as seen in the light of the discussion in the preceding pages, against those which the philosophers consider essential. The requirements which traditional ethics, as well as its critics, have believed it incumbent upon any ethics to adopt are listed by Evelyn Shirk as follows. 1. It must present a single standard or principle in terms of which ethical acts are to be judged. 2. The standard must be universal, applicable in all contexts and at any time or place. 3. It must be precise and unambiguous. 4. It must be acceptable on sight and require no extended justification or defense. 5. It must be immune to error. And 6. It must resolve all ethical questions. Shirk puts out these requirements, but then she calls the requirements silly and totally unrealistic. A silly effort to gain simplicity, and she calls it nonsense. Burdens so heavy, she says, that they are certain to break the spine of any inquiry into rational practice. But Larson says the code of Sector 3 has all of these characteristics, however unrealistic they may seem to those who are baffled in their attempts to derive a moral code from sources within the physical universe. And he makes the following statements about those 6 standards that Shirk put out. 1, a single standard, the Sector 3 code, is applicable. 2, the standard is universal. It applies at all times and in all places. 3, natural laws are inherently precise and unambiguous if correctly expressed. 4, the statement that ethical man will act in accordance with the natural laws governing the behavior of ethical men requires no further explanation or justification. 5, the code is never wrong, but we have a great deal of work to do before we will know it in detail. 6. Since the moral objective is total compliance with the Sector 3 code, a full knowledge of this code is all that is necessary in order to arrive at the proper action in any situation that may arise. The true basis of ethics, then, is just the kind of a thing that traditional ethics and its critics have always insisted that it must be. The individuals so described have had an intuitive understanding of the true situation that has caused them to hold fast to their viewpoint in spite of its lack of empirical support. Intuition or insight not only gives us the answers to most of our simple ethical problems, but also defines the general nature of the moral code upon which these answers are based. What this present work has added is the identification of the code as the set of natural laws and principles that govern Sector 3 of existence as a whole. And then he goes off and starts criticizing Shirk for her fallacies. These answers are, back to Larson, these answers are not all available to us at present, but this is not because of any imperfection in the physical laws. It is because we do not as yet have a full understanding of them. The same kind of a situation exists in the ethical field. The moral code itself is complete and correct, and it is capable of providing the answers to all of our moral problems. But we are still in the early stages of developing an adequate understanding of the natural laws that constitute the code, a development that necessarily proceeds slowly while we have to contend with those like the author quoted and the various schools of philosophical thought who deny the existence of a fixed moral code. Now he's quoting Michael Walzer, who disagrees and thinks that morality is not a body of factual knowledge. Our findings are in direct conflict. Morality is such a body of factual knowledge. In its entirety is beyond the scope of a one-year college course, but instruction in its essential requirements certainly belongs in the college curricula. One of the best ways of ensuring a continuation of this interest is to emphasize the fact that the moral laws are no different from the physical laws in anything but their subject matter, and they are equally susceptible to precise definition. The continuing development of the details of the true moral code that is now possible because of the clarification will ultimately have some very significant effects. It should sooner or later result in purging the religious regulations of the non-moral additions and embellishments that have been accumulated over the years, or at least clarify the status of these items enough to deprive them of their mandatory character. As matters now stand, a vast amount of unnecessary distress is caused by conflicts in which individuals are torn between following a course that they believe is right and obeying an injunction of their church that prohibits it. Elimination of the non-moral items from the religious regulations will go a long way toward minimizing these conflicts. Inasmuch as these non-moral rules are the ones that are most commonly broken or disregarded, their elimination from the religious codes will also tend to enhance the authority and increase the observance of the genuinely moral regulations that remain in effect. It should also help to counteract the widespread belief that living a moral life is an arduous and disagreeable task. He quotes a few other people that feel that way, that's too onerous to be moral. And he says, adopting the moral point of view involves acting on principle. It involves conforming to rules even when doing so is unpleasant, painful, costly, or ruinous to oneself. Now, Larson goes ahead. Many of the organized religions reinforce this impression by portraying conformity with their directives as religious labor, for which recompense is of some kind will ultimately be received. But these organizations do not distinguish between moral directives and directives of other kinds, those are which are ethically neutral. And it is doubtful if any substantial number of these painful or ruinous consequences have resulted from tenacity in upholding moral principles. The martyrs in all ages have suffered for their religious or political views, not their moral views. The holy wars and schisms that create so much turmoil in the world are concerned with doctrinal issues, not moral issues. Unless a person takes a fanatical stand on some particular point and insists that his interpretation of this point must take precedence over all other considerations, it is not likely that he will have to pay any price for the inner peace that accompanies the knowledge that he has done the right thing. Perhaps he may have to pass up some opportunities to make dishonest gains, but this can scarcely be regarded as a serious hardship. As we will see in the next chapter, the common view in which moral behavior is seen as a heavy burden is a gross distortion of the true picture. And so that's kind of the point Larson's going to get at here, I guess, in the next chapter, chapter 21, called the personal aspect of ethics. A person under the influence of Sector 3, an ethical person, enjoys being ethical, doesn't see it as a burden. You know, it's that's what they want to do, not because they're compelled to. Okay, we'll take over there, starting with chapter 21 tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.